Hello, and welcome to this Medicine Admissions Live Lounge. My name's Dr. Rob Cullum. I'm a local GP and widening participation and outreach champion for Lincoln Medical School. And today I'm joined by Professor David O'Brien, who's a local consultant cardiologist and Dean of Clinical Medicine. What we're going to do today is talk you through the medicine application process. So we're going to cover a few different things today. So the first thing we're going to cover is the application timeline. We're going to talk about the GCSE and A-level requirements for our two medicine programs here at Lincoln Medical School. We'll talk to you a little bit about personal statements. We'll cover the UCAT, and then at the end, there'll be plenty of time for your questions. If you have got any questions, please do continue to put them in the chat on the way through, and then we'll cover those at the end. So what I'm going to do first is talk a little bit about the application timeline. And I'm sure we've got a mixture of people watching this live lounge today. So I'm going to start by talking about the kinds of things that fit in year 11. So obviously in year 11, you sit your GCSEs, and these are important when it comes to applying to medical school. And David will cover that in a little bit when we talk about our entrance requirements. But alongside that, we hope that you're doing some extracurricular activities and some work experience, because that's really important for applications to medicine. We want to see through the process that you're doing other things and getting some work experience and understanding a little bit about what it is to be a doctor specifically, and also work experience that looks at how you have interacted with the general public generally, or in a caring role, can be really important. Obviously in year 11 as well, you're going to be selecting A-levels, and we'll talk a little bit about what kinds of A-levels you need to have taken if you're at that stage. In year 12, where I imagine a lot of people watching are, you're going to hopefully have been continuing those extracurricular activities, perhaps done some different work experience. And at this sort of stage of year 12, as we go into the summer, you're probably going to be working on your personal statement and also looking to prepare for and then sit over the next couple of months UCAT. And I'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end of the live lounge. And then finally in year 13, you're obviously going to sit your A-levels, hopefully carry on those extracurricular activities. But the really key date that I want you to take away from today in terms of application timelines is the UCAS deadline. So for medicine, the UCAS deadline is earlier than it is for other courses, and that's the 15th of October. Once you've got that application in, there's a little bit of time to relax, but the next thing to think about is going to be interviews. So medicine courses, we interview, and those interviews happen once we've got in those applications, we process them, and then interviews happen over the following few months, and offers follow that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hand over to David, who's going to talk a little bit about our medicine programs here at Lincoln.
Thanks very much, Rob, and welcome to everybody that's joining us on this live lounge today. Just to follow up before I go on to the next about the course details, then the interviews, just so you get an idea of when they are, for Lincoln Medical School will probably be interviewing predominantly in December after that October submission date. And most of the interviews we are intending to get done in December, maybe a few at the beginning of January, because we're quite keen on getting offers out early to people in February of 2026. So let me talk a little bit about our offerings for Lincoln Medical School courses. So we've got two courses at Lincoln Medical School. We've got a standard 5-year course, and we've got a 6-year medicine course with a gateway year. So I just want to talk about the two of those in detail. You'll see that our medicine degree is MBChB, and you might have seen medicine degrees written up like this before, or you might not have done. It's basically just an older term from the Latin, essentially, for Bachelor of Medicine, Bachelor of Surgery. So in some universities now that's BMBS, but we still use the older from the Latin, which is MBChB. So that's what those letters mean. And the two programs both have a code in front of them. One is A100 and one is A106. It's easy to remember which is which because the 6 is our 6-year course. So the A100 5-year program, it's important to know that code because that will determine which you apply for on the UCAS system when you go in. A note about the 6-year program, the medicine with the gateway year program, is that this is specifically designed to widen access. So for students who come from less traditional backgrounds with an intention of diversifying the medical workforce. So it's important, you know, it's a slightly different program to the 5-year program in terms of the application criteria. So let me first talk about the 5-year program. So there's a couple of things. You need to have some minimum criteria to get into the course, and that's based on what qualifications you already have. So that will be your GCSEs. And then if you're successful through our process and through our interviews, you'll be made an offer. And the offer then will require you to obtain certain A-level grades. So in terms of the GCSE requirements, we require at least 6 GCSEs at grade 7 or above. And those 6 must include biology and chemistry, or double science if you've taken a combined subject. You also must get at least a grade 6 in English language and mathematics. If, as I say, you're successful through our application process, then you'll be made an offer, and our standard offer will be 3 A's at A-level or equivalent. The only requirement we have really is that one of those A-levels is biology, and you obviously then would need to get an A in A-level biology. The other 2 subjects are any other 2 A-level subjects you like, but as I've noted on the slide here, we don't accept general studies, critical thinking, global perspectives, or citizenship studies. If you're a contextual applicant, and I'll speak about that a little bit later on, then you'll be given a contextual offer for that 5-year course, and that would usually be AAB, or equivalent. And the AAB or equivalent requires you to at least have an A in A-level biology. You can have a B in one of your other subjects. So what about the Medicine with a Gateway Year program, A106? So there's a couple of things about that course that are very specific. In order to apply for that course, you must be a contextual applicant, and I'll talk about those criteria later. So you must be a UK home student, and you must attend a state school. If you satisfy those criteria, then the GCSE requirements are different, and the A-level offer is different from our 5-year course. The GCSE requirements are at least 5 GCSEs at grade 6 or above, and those must include English language, maths, biology, and chemistry, or double science, again, if you've taken a combined subject. If you're again successful through our program of application for that course, then the A-level offer would be 3 Bs or equivalent, and that must include A-level biology. Again, we don't include subjects like general studies, critical thinking, global perspectives, or citizenship studies. I said I'd mentioned contextual applicants. So, as I mentioned earlier, in order to apply for the Medicine with a Gateway course, the 6-year course, you have to be a contextual applicant. So you really need to confirm that's the case in our eyes as a university and a medical school before you put your application in. And if we do consider you a contextual applicant, then yes, that course is open to you, but you can also apply for the 5-year course, in which case you'd get a reduced offer, our contextual offer of AAB, as I noted in the previous slide. And we use a number of different criteria to determine whether somebody is a contextual applicant. Whereabouts you live is quite important, so your postcode, if you come from an area of socioeconomic deprivation, or if you come to an area where not a lot of people go to university or into higher education, if you have a disability or you have a long-term health condition, and particularly if you're care experienced, all of these things will identify you as a contextual applicant and open up the Gateway course to you, but also change our offer to one of a contextual one. So if you're not clear about whether you're a contextual applicant, but you think you might be, it's really important that you put an inquiry through to our admissions inquiry team and clarify that before you put your application in. I think at this stage, I just want to mention personal statements. So obviously when you're in school and you're working up your university applications, then personal statements are really important, and you're going to spend quite a lot of time refining your personal statement. And that's really important because it helps consolidate why you're applying for the course that you're applying for, what your strengths are, how you might demonstrate some of your experience thus far. But we don't actually use your personal statement in a scored way as part of your application. We look at your personal statement and we look at your school references, and we look at aspects like why you want to study medicine and maybe how your qualifications and other studies have helped you prepare for a career in healthcare. But also particularly what makes up you as a person and what you've done outside of school and outside of academia. So what other interests do you have, and what have you done that might help you in not just your application to medical school, but also in your future career as a doctor? So your personal statement is important in that way. It can also help kind of organize your thoughts, particularly around interviews, etc. But I want to point out that we don't use that in a formal way to score your application to medical school. Okay, I'm going to hand back across to Rob to talk to you about aptitude tests and what that involves, and then potentially we can talk about how we use that in our application process. So Rob.
Thanks, David. So what I want to do is talk a little bit now about UCAT. So UCAT, or the University Clinical Aptitude Test, is an online test that we use as part of our application process to help determine who we're going to interview, and we use it across both of our programs. The idea of the test is that it tests innate skills. It's not a test of knowledge, but rather a test of your academic ability more generally. And for most applicants, it lasts just under 2 hours, but if you are eligible potentially for extra time, it will last around 2.5 hours. I'm not going to go into the details of this today, but there's lots of information on the UCAT website about who might be eligible for extra time. And in general, if you're eligible for additional time in your exams at school, you're likely to be eligible for additional time in the UCAT. It is really important that you look at that. And if you're planning to sit UCAT this year, that applications to apply for additional time in the assessment are open now. So it's really important that you have a look at that and get that ball rolling. And the final thing I just want to say about the UCAT more generally is that it is used by a lot of medical schools and dental schools as well. There are 4 sections to the UCAT. There's a verbal reasoning component, a decision-making component, a quantitative reasoning component, and a situational judgment component. And different medical schools use this in a different way, and use these sort of combined or separately to add to their applications, as I say, in different ways. How we use it is still in the process of being finalised, but those details will be on the website shortly. So it's really important that you do look at those once you've got a score, because that might help you decide whether applying to Lincoln is the right medical school for you. All of the information that I present about UCAT here is also on the UCAT website with a bit more detail. So it's really worth having a look at their website. There's lots of really helpful information on there. In terms of them, you'll see that the sort of different segments are of different lengths and different questions. But I think one of the key take homes really about UCAT is it's a very time pressured assessment. And with that in mind, there are lots of different resources on the UCAT website to help you prepare for this, with lots of practice questions on the UCAT website, and it's worth having a look at those, going through them first in an untimed way, and as you work up to being close to the assessment, then doing them in a timed way so that you get used to that pressure, get used to the calculator that it allows you to use in the system. Getting used to that is really important, and having spent time practicing it, we recommend that people do spend a period of time practicing it before you sit the assessment. Booking for UCAT is open now, so I'd strongly recommend, if you are sitting at this year and you haven't booked a place already, that this is something that you start working on and get a place booked for as soon as possible. So just moving on to the next slide, as I've already said, things are open already. So I've got the important dates for this year on the screen now. The main things that I want to draw your attention to is that testing started yesterday. So testing is now open, and if you have got a reason that you need additional time, the deadline for applying isn't until September to get that, but what I would strongly recommend you do is apply early, because sometimes places for the additional timed assessment are in short supply, and if the assessment's sat in Pearson VUE centres across the country, but if you need one of those longer time slots, it's better to get it booked and sorted early so that you can get it in a location that's convenient for you. The last testing day is towards the end of September, as you can see, the 26th. So that's really important to just be aware of. Something else that you'll see on this slide is reference to bursary. So if you do come from a background with financial constraints, there is a bursary scheme for UCAT. The full details of that are on the UCAT website as well, but you can apply for a voucher that you can get a voucher code that you can put in when you're booking your test. You don't have to pay, or if you've already paid but you are eligible, you can then apply through that scheme to get a refund as well. And And essentially what happens is you get a copy of your results on the day, but they're also then delivered directly to the universities you've applied to in November. So just in terms of a few other bits about UCAT. So the test costs £70, as I've said, for people from low income backgrounds. There is a bursary available to apply for that. And just want to reiterate one final time about the extra time. If you're entitled to extra time in your exams, usually it's likely you would be for UCAT, but it is really important that you get an application in for that as soon as possible. So if we can just move on to the final slide. In terms of about UCAT, as I've said, it is an aptitude test. It is about your ability rather than knowledge, but that doesn't mean that that preparation, isn't important. We know that the people who perform best are people who've spent time practicing, potentially 25 or 30 hours as a minimum. So it's worth starting to look at that 4 to 6 weeks before you plan to take the assessment. The summer holidays is often a really good time to work on that. You've not got school. It's something that you can sort of gradually do a bit of every day. And as I said, the UCAT website has loads of free resources. We don't recommend or endorse any specific paid for private preparation materials. I would strongly recommend, though, that you do use the resources on the UCAT website. There are loads of questions and they're really helpful and really reflective of the real life assessment. So in terms of final thing, just to really reiterate, the best place to go for information is the UCAT website. So I think we've got some questions. So I'm just going to have a look at what we've got.
Whilst you're looking at those, Rob, it might just be worthwhile mentioning again, in addition about UCAT, is that a couple of things. You're right in stressing about applying for extra time if you're eligible, and also for access requirements if you need those, but they have to be applied for and agreed in advance. I think it's really clear that that's the case. You cannot just arrive and state that you're given extra time. You have to have that agreed in advance by UCAT. So get that in really early. And the second thing is in regards to the UCAT bursary. If you think that you're eligible for the UCAT bursary, it really is important that you apply for that. And that's because lots of medical schools use the UCAT bursary as one of those contextual applicant flags. And so even if you think you can probably maybe afford £70, if you think that you're eligible for the bursary, it's worth applying for it, because when your results are sent back to us as a medical school, they tell us whether you have the UCAT bursary or not. And many medical schools, including us, will look at that to determine whether your application is contextual or not. So it's just worthwhile doing that.
Thanks for that, David. So we've got a few questions. So the first question, which I think would be really important to cover here, is what do you take in account when you're considering student applications for medicine? And I know you've already touched upon this a little bit, David, but I wonder if you could maybe give us a little bit more detail about how things sort of are pulled together.
Yeah, of course. It's quite complicated. So I'd say, unlike some other subjects, it is quite complicated. And that's largely because we have an awful lot of people normally applying for medicine. And so we have to go through those applications and almost reduce the numbers down, because we are going to have to interview everybody that we want to potentially make an offer to. So as you mentioned, the interview is a requirement for a medicine course. So to manage those numbers, we look at a number of things. We firstly look at your academic performance, and we look at your academic performance in a way that creates a special score for us. So that score basically is created by looking at your GCSEs and converting your grades at GCSEs into points. And what I propose to do is pop all of this on the website. It will be going on very shortly, and there'll be some worked examples as well on the website as to how to calculate this. But roughly a grade 9 will equate to 5 points, and it will go down to a grade 5 that will equate to 1 point. And we'll score your GCSEs and create a number of points from that. We'll then take your UCAT score and we'll look at each of those different components. So those 3 components of the core test, we will look at, and we will change the number that you get for that component, the score that you'll be given at UCAT, and we'll create that into our special point score. And we'll also look at the band of the situational judgment test that you're given. So the important thing for the 3 core components is that you're given a score out of 900. And for the situational judgment test, you're given a band 1 to 4. 1 is the best band. And basically a situational judgment test works by giving you a situation and then asking you how you would behave or manage that situation, and comparing your answer to a panel of other people who are experts in that area. If you get a band 1, it basically means that your judgment in that situation aligns with the recommended judgment. If you get a band 4, it means that often your judgment is not aligning with other people who are expert in that area. And so one of the things to note regarding situational judgment tests is that if you get a band 4 in that, we wouldn't actually accept your application or process it further for medicine. And that's similar to many medical schools up and down the country. There are a couple that might, but on the whole, most don't progress applications that have an SJT or situational judgment test band 4. We also take that band 1 to 3 then and convert that into points, and we end up with a big point score. And it's that point score that we use to decide who to call to interview. If you're a contextual applicant, and we're coming back to that again, we add some additional points for various things, such as if your care experience, if you have a disability, or where you might live. So we add those additional points that might benefit you in your application. Once we've got that combined, what we call an academic score, we use that score to decide who to interview. And our interviews are multiple mini interviews where you rotate around different interviewers across 7 stations, and it's an in-person interview. You get a score for that interview, and we add that score to some of the academic score that we've brought through and create a final score, and it's that final score that we then use to decide who we're going to make an offer to. So it's quite complicated, but once you've seen a kind of worked example and it's broken down for you, and you know that you'll have your GCSEs and you'll have your UCAT score to hand, you can kind of put your points in the system and work out what you're going to have and decide whether you think that you're going to be competitive. And it's really important when you're looking at medical schools in general to try to play to your own strengths. So if you've got a really good set of GCSEs, then you want to apply to a medical school that's going to look at your GCSEs and consider those. If you have a really good UCAT score, you might want to apply to a university that's going to focus largely on your UCAT score. What we're trying to do is give you an equal opportunity through both so that you're not disadvantaged if either don't go quite as well as you might want.
Thanks for that. That's really, really helpful. So the next question that we've had through is, how are clinical placements organised, and what kind of hospitals or clinics do students get to work in?
So one of the things about our course is that we really focus on getting clinical experience from the very early stages of the course. So some medicine courses are still fairly traditional. You're taught mainly in university for the first few years. You don't do very much in terms of clinical practice. What we want to do is get people involved in the clinical environment really from the beginning of the course. So although the earlier years in years 1 and 2 are predominantly taught on campus, we do rotate students round into community placements. They might be in general practice, like your own, Rob. They might be in things like pharmacists. They might be attached to community health centres. They might be through opportunities in the community health trusts or in the charitable sector, for instance, as well as some hospital visits. And in terms of as your clinical placements progress, then from years 3 onwards, virtually all of the teaching is done on clinical placement. We have 1 day a week that we're going to bring all students back to campus in years 3, 4, and 5, where basically it's a way of keeping you involved in the medical school and also us being able to teach certain things that might be difficult for you to experience on various different placements. The hospitals that we use are the hospitals based in Lincolnshire, and they're the 2 main hospitals in the acute trust, which is Lincoln County Hospital and Pilgrim Hospital in Boston. We also will be using Grantham Hospital, which is now doing a lot of what we call planned or elective work. So it's quite useful to be involved there. And we use general practices across the entire county, right up to the far borders.
Great, thank you. And another question that we've had through is, what opportunities are there for hands-on experience and practical learning? I know you've already touched on this, but I wonder if you might be able to expand a bit more.
So the way in which medicine is taught nowadays, and what we're kind of really keen, is that we get you to have practical experience as soon as possible, as I've said. Some of that's difficult to do in practice without doing it first in a relatively safe environment. And so what we do often is we have clinical skills areas or clinical skills suites, and we have one based on campus at the university, and we have clinical skills suites also at our large teaching hospitals. And we use those areas to get you used to doing practical procedures on dummies and mannequins that are very kind of lifelike in many different ways, so that you get to practice to a level before you're then able to go and do that on patients out in the different clinical areas. So we use that clinical skills and simulation quite a lot. And we use that right from the beginning in terms of simulating things like consultations to get you to develop your communication skills and your consultation skills, etc. So a blend of kind of simulation and clinical skills that then becomes more and more delivered in the kind of actual clinical environment with real patients as you progress through the course.
Great, thank you very much. At the moment, we've not had any other questions through. One of the things that I would say, if you're not watching this live and you've then got a question, is lots of things are going on the website, and that's constantly being updated at the moment, and there will be some frequently asked questions on the website as well. But if your question's not on there and there's something you want to know, as we've already alluded to, the best way of getting in touch is via the admissions inquiry service, and then that question will be passed on to the team to get back to you. And I'd strongly recommend that you do that if you've got any specific questions about your specific application situation. It
might be worthwhile mentioning, Rob, just in terms of, we talked about the application cycle opening in being open and closing in October for 2026 entry. So for the 5-year medicine course that I talked about, you'll need to get your application in for October the 15th to be processed, so that you, if you're successful, you would start in September 2026. The gateway year program, the medicine with a gateway year that we talked about, is basically an additional year at the beginning before that 5-year course. So it's a 6-year run through, but it has an additional year at the beginning. That course is planning to go live this September, so September 2025. So if you're interested in that course, if you've sat your UCAT, if you are not holding any offers for medicine and you're a contextual applicant, then you might want to consider looking out for that course, which will open in clearing. And it will be recruiting in clearing this summer after A-level results day, to basically get people started for September 2025. And then those students will run through into the first year of the 5-year course in September 2026.
Great, thanks for that, David. And I think that's a really nice note to end on. So thank you for everyone that's joined us live today. And as I say, if you have got any questions at all, then please do get in touch with the team, because we'd be more than happy to help.